of Law, Goa, on the topic Reproductive Rights of Women in India, an analysis of constitutional jurisprudence, judicial attitudes, and state policies. I welcome you.
Is process operation here? I think
Yes, he hasn't joined the meeting yet.
I think yes, he has not yet joined the meeting as such. I think so. So any of the next speakers?
So, shall we move on to the next speaker, sir?
Yes, I think then we can actually take up process of separation once he joins. I think he's not yet joined as of now.
Okay, sir. So sorry for the inconvenience caused. Next, we have Vinny Kevalia, research scholar and assistant professor at Maharaja Ganga Singh University and Manipal University, Rajasthan, on the topic Feminist Jurisprudence and Reproductive Choices of Women in India. I welcome you.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you so much. I also want to share my screen. May I?
Sure.
Thank you. I think now it's showing on the screen.
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. So I'm Vinny Kevalia, as you have introduced. I'm research scholar at Maharaja Ganga Singh University, Bikaner, and assistant professor at Manipal University, Jaipur. And the topic of my presentation here is the feminist jurisprudence and the reproductive choices of women in India. This is yet a very burning topic for all the women because she is not aware about her rights, that what kind of reproductive choices available to her and what kinds of rights are covered in the under this topic. So starting with this, I would like to present that what is covered in the reproductive choices, or rather we can call it as a rights available to a woman, which she is not aware of, and mostly in the rural area she is not aware about the rights that is available to her. They are basically an inalienable survival right of women, but yet she is surviving without these rights since ages, because in the patriarchal society of India these rights are basically controlled by a man. Especially in a country like India, it is a man who decides that what kind of right can be given to her and what kind of right can be denied to her. So now what it includes, this connotation of reproductive choices includes a choice to reproduce and to have a reproductive health. This may also include an individual right to plan a family, to terminate a pregnancy, to use contraceptives, to learn about sex education in public schools, and to gain access to the reproductive health services. But this is just an area. But actually, this right also includes so many ancillary rights to it, but she is not aware about that. She is not aware about the informed consent which she can use to access these rights. It also includes a choice of a woman to keep space between children or among the children. Now, what are the state's obligation for these rights? That women and girls not only have access to the comprehensive reproductive health information, that they must experience positive reproductive health outcomes such as lower rates of unsafe abortion, maternal mortality, and the opportunity to make fully informed decisions free from violence, discrimination, and coercion about their sexuality and reproduction. The Government of India also bears a constitutional mandate to ensure the legal remedies for the violation of fundamental rights and the human rights. There are so many provisions under the Constitution of India which actually compels the government to make a safer reproductive choices for the women, and discover a lot of rights under it. under the legal framework, prima facie, if we look at our constitution, then it covers the right to equality and non-discrimination, which is specifically mentioned under Article 14 and 15. But non-discrimination provision is there. But actually, is it so? Then we'll see about it. Then right to life under Article 21, which is understood through jurisprudence to include the right to health, dignity, freedom from torture and ill treatment, and privacy. The government is also mandated to promote equal access to justice and free legal aid as a means to ensure that opportunities for the justice are not denied to any citizen by reason of economic or other disabilities. But there are so many provisions like sterilization is there, choices of contraceptives are there, but government is not able to give all such services to a woman, because whenever we ask from the government that why they are denying these kind of services to a woman, then the defense taken by the government is the lack of financial resources, lack of management is there. This is not about the reproductive choices also. Even a woman is not aware about a menstrual hygiene, which is a basic right for her. And thereafter comes the choice of reproductive nature. But the very first basic right to have a safer menstrual hygiene, but she is being denied to that. Thereafter, if we look at the international framework, because we are also bound to observe and to promote the international mandates which is there for the protection of the rights of women, then the first conference that I want to mention here is the International Conference on the Population and the Development, ICPD, held in Cairo in 1994. For the first time, there was a clear focus on the needs of the individuals and on the empowerment of women, and the emergence of an evolving discourse about the connection between human rights and health, linking new conceptions of health to the struggle for social justice and respect for human dignity. At first instance, where women were not treated as a tools through which to implement population programs and policies, rather it gave authority to women over her bodily integrity and choices, which according to me is the most important facet of the right to have a reproductive choices. Because most of the time we notice that in India, the woman is treated as an object or as a tool where government can implement population programs and can achieve the targets through the instrumentality of a woman. So this thing should not be there. Rather, this is a basic right of a woman which should be respected and protected by the government. The next convention is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. This convention clearly states about women's right to health, which includes their sexual and the reproductive health. Article 16 and 10 are the more important article of these convention, which guarantees the women equal rights in deciding freely and responsibility on the number and the spacing of their children, and to have access to the information, education, and the means to enable them to exercise these rights. But this provision is blatantly violated in almost all the families, because just after her marriage, she is being compelled to conceive. Thereafter, once she conceives, immediately after the first delivery, she is compelled to take another conceive. Why? Because this is the system of Indian society where women is supposed to procreate children specifically after the marriage. It is the duty of a woman to do that, but it should not be there. Rather, it should be her free choice to do or not to do that. Thereafter, Article 10 is there, which specifies that the women's right to education includes access to specific educational information to help to ensure the health and well-being of the families, include information and advice on family planning. The term family is there, but it is a choice of the male member of that family. Women is not included in that in most of the Indian societies. Thereafter, we come to the reality which is actually happening in India, that in India, women is used as a tool for population control. Male sterilization is viewed as culturally unacceptable in India's conservative society. Basically, in government-run sterilization camps, women gets compensation. Why? Because women is treated as a target to get sterilization. Thereafter, she will receive compensation for that, which help her family in economic terms. So this should not be there. This should not be treated as an instrument. So the women's choice of sterilization is always treated from two perspectives. The first one is the political agenda of achieving targets, and the next one is exercising a male dominance. So according to me, this should not be done in this way. Rather, it is her inalienable right, it is her fundamental right to receive all the information about it at the right time in the right way. Next, in India, the process of the public health policy making is an interesting one in the political terms because it views women as a tool of achieving agendas, and majorly policy framers are also males. This is again the drawback of the Indian society. More and more females should be included in the policy making process so that more informed decision can be taken by the women. In 2011, we noticed that the authorities in Rajasthan offered many prizes like a motorcycle, television sets, food blenders, and even a chance to win India's cheapest car, Tata Nano. So, this kind of lucrative offer should not be there. Rather, it should be like her right to choose or not to choose. But information about that must be given to her at the school level. The choices of contraceptives should be given to her at the school level. So negligence even occurred in such kind of sterilization camps. 11 Indian women have died after undergoing a sterilization surgery at the health camp organized by the government in the central state of Chhattisgarh in 2014. These kind of negligence are mostly unaccountable. Very few instances came into the notice of the government, and in very few instances the government has taken against those medical health officers. Most of the time it goes unnoticed, and what the government notice is just that they have achieved the target. In 2012, 3 men were arrested in Bihar for operating on 53 women in 2 hours in a field and without the use of anesthetic. Now see the pathetic condition women is undergoing. There is a complete absence of informed consent. Again, the next thing that I have covered in my presentation is about the contraceptive choices. Access to comprehensive contraceptive care and contraceptive methods as an integral component of the women's health care. The program of action of the International Conference on the Population and the Development to recognize the right of the man and the women to be informed and to have access to the safe, effective, affordable, and acceptable methods of the family planning of their choice. This is the reality, but we need to do a lot for that. Again, in the reality point, I have mentioned that for an estimated 45,000 Indian women every year getting pregnant turns out to be a death sentence for them. See the plight of a woman. 3 in 8 men believe that the contraception in women's business and that men should not have to worry about it. Why is
Ma'am,
it so?
sorry for the interruption. You've already exceeded 10 minutes, so please make it fast. This is a slight one.
Sure, ma'am, definitely. I have covered the feminist perspective here because it is the Indian society where the patriarchal notion flows in the society. So this should be curbed. Judicial approach I have mentioned here, where the cases are covered given by the Supreme Court and the High Courts, where the right instructions are given to the government. But the point that I am noticing here, that specific instructions must be given to the male of a family, because it is their duty to make her informed choices. In the suggestion part, I have mentioned that invest in the provider training. Women should be trained with reproductive choices available to her. She must understand the meaning and the value of the informed consent. And in the schools, specific sessions should be conducted where sex education must include information about contraceptive choices. So this is all from my side. Thank you so much. Hello, Uttara.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's move on to the next participant.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, I think our session speaker has got something to say.
No, that I think I'll actually add later. I think we can go to next speaker.
Okay, fine, sir.
Is Professor Precious there, or we? I don't think, right? So we can actually go to.
No, sir, he hasn't joined yet.
Yeah, so I think we can go to the next speaker.
Up next, I invite our next presenter, Sushmita Das and Subham Gumasta, research scholars, Amity Law School, Madhya Pradesh, on the topic Surrogacy, a reproductive choice of women as a fundamental right. I welcome both of you.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Good afternoon to one and all. The title of my paper is Surrogacy, a reproductive choice of women as a fundamental right. Every woman in the world must have basic right of choice for reproduction. The freedom should be given to a female whether she want to give birth to a child or she want to opt out for surrogacy. Or there are many other techniques like IVF that is in vitro fertilization, scientific other methods, etc. So surrogacy is a great challenge and a roadmap to a future. The meaning of surrogacy, that is, a child is developed genetically. A woman have right to plan for a family, and also she should have the right to go for surrogacy. There are different reproductive choices for a woman like abortion, family planning, consent of women. So these are already the rights which are provided to a woman, but the surrogacy is not a right yet. But legally it is not accepted as reproductive choice for a woman. So the reproductive right must be constitutionally protected in India as it is a human dignity and right to life under Article 21. More importantly, reproductive rights are ignored and due to lack of awareness in the society. Even a woman do not talk openly in the society about her reproductive rights, or even a mother doesn't educate her child or tell a female or a male child that there should be some reproductive right, reproductive health, sexual health openly in even a home. Then one should understand the terminologies like sexual health, reproductive right, right to sexual health. And in India, there are certain legislations like the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act of 1971, which already made abortion as legal. Then there was a case, Roe versus Wade in US, which is a landmark case in which abortion was made legal. In India, due to societal pressure, when a girl is started when a girl is having an age of 25, there is a constant pressure on her to get married and have a family plan thereafter. Therefore, surrogacy should be the basic right, a fundamental right, as right of choice given to a woman of all these status. As the concept of surrogacy is not a very new concept, it is a very old concept because the child who was born first out of surrogacy is now a 42-year-old. Thus, the Surrogacy Bill 2019 is yet to pass in the houses. Thank you so much.
Hello, ma'am. Shall we move on to the next presenter?
Yes, Sudha.
Dev Prasad, sir, have you got any comments?
No, actually, I'll take the comments together in the end. So I think we
Okay,
can go to the speakers. Yes, thanks.
okay, sir. That's fine. I now welcome Advocate Bhagyashree Agarwal, who is a legal practitioner in Assam, on the topic International Framework on Reproductive Rights and Analysis. I welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you, Uttara. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you for the introduction, and I would like to present my screen if that is okay. So the topic of my paper is International Framework on Reproductive Rights and Analysis. As we have already spoken on reproductive rights in the inaugural session, and there have been various speakers who've dealt with the definition of it, but I would still like to go through the definition which was given by the International Conference on Population and Development Program of Action in 1995. As we can see, this definition has three distinct parts. So the first one, it talks about the right to make a decision about the timing, space, and the number of children. This is given to partners as well as individuals. And to make such a decision, information is also considered to be essential. And the second part of this definition discusses the right to the highest standard of reproductive life and sexual health. And the third part of this definition deals with free consent, non-discrimination, equality, non-violence, and full information. So as we go through this definition, we get to know that not just partners and individuals, even persons from vulnerable communities, minority ethnic groups, children, sexual minorities, all of these, they come under the ambit of sexual and reproductive health, and their rights should not be ignored. The World Health Organization has also given 5 major components defining the sexual and reproductive health of an individual. So the contraceptive choices of an individual regarding should be ensured, and safety and services regarding safety and infertility also should be provided to individuals. The health of mother and newborn should be improved in all circumstances. Sexually transmitted infections should be prevented. Maternal morbidities should be minimized. Unsafe abortion practices should be prevented. Post-abortion care should be provided. Harmful sexual practices such as female genital mutilation, which affect the sexual and reproductive health of an individual, they should be prevented. So all of them, they come under the ambit of the definition of sexual and reproductive health given by the World Health Organization. Here I have an historical overview of the development of reproductive rights over the years at an international level, starting with the Tehran Conference on Human Rights, which discussed reproductive rights as a part of human rights of an individual. And the major defining conference which put reproductive rights on a global level was the International Conference on Population and Development in 1994, following which we have Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals, which also talk about maternal health and gender equality. There are regional conferences as well, such as Protocol to the African Charter on Human Rights and People's Rights and Rights of Women, the Maputo Protocol, which discusses the reproductive rights of women. Now, while discussing reproductive health, we should also talk about reproductive autonomy. And these are certain key issues which define the discussion of reproductive autonomy in our world, such as access to information and how information is very important for exercising one's reproductive autonomy, and the vulnerable sections of our society should not be ignored, and their reproductive autonomy should be protected. How adolescents and youngsters, they are very keen on experimenting with their sexuality and exploring, so their choices should be ensured. Proper sex education should be provided to them so that they do not indulge in harmful practices which can be detrimental to their life. Equality and non-discrimination is the essence of any right which a individual has, and to access reproductive autonomy, equality and non-discrimination is also very essential. Now, moving on to the international and regional framework on reproductive rights. So as we know, there is not a single dedicated document or an instrument for reproductive rights on a global level. It is not available, one single document which deals. There are various international conventions, there are various regional agreements and conferences which deal with the idea of reproductive health, and these are certain rights, as you can see on the screen. These certain rights, they form the basis of reproductive and sexual health, reproductive rights of an individual at the international level. So when we talk about non-discrimination and equal treatment, without this right, it's very difficult to exercise all the other rights given to an individual. Discrimination of any kind is a hindrance to realize the capacities of a human being, and when we talk about reproductive health, if a husband's consent is unavailable, the health facility might deny treatment, and this is considered to be a grave violation of the non-discrimination clause given. There are disadvantaged and vulnerable groups, persons with disabilities. So discrimination is also intersectional in nature, and all of this, they affect the professional aspects of an individual. Women, as we know, they are at a higher risk for HIV and other infections, female genital mutility, child marriage, marital rape. All of these, they affect. There's a higher incidence of them affecting women in general, and we see ICCPR and ICSCR, Convention for Rights of Child. All of them, they have non-discrimination clauses incorporated in them. And when we talk about right to life, any death which is avoidable should be prevented. There should be access to quality and timely health care that should be provided to women while they are making reproductive choices, and their health should not be ignored. Like, right to physical integrity means having personal autonomy, right to have control over their own bodies, and such rights should be exercised with full information and free from intervention. So forced sterilization, sexual violence, domestic violence, human trafficking, all of these, they collectively affect the right to physical integrity of an individual. And if reproductive rights of a woman are taken away, that affects the right to physical integrity of the woman. So if a woman is denied health care, if she's detained, if she's denied access to abortion, female genital mutilation, all of this, they take away the right to physical integrity of an individual. Right to marry and start a family, this includes the right to decide the timing and the number of children a woman wants to have. So the minimum age of marriage for both men and women should be same, as if it's lower for a woman, then it causes disadvantages regarding education, employment, and other welfare opportunities for women. And all of these, while discussing all of these, persons with disabilities should not be ignored. Their reproductive health is also as equally important as an abled individual. Forced sterilizations of persons with disabilities without consent is also a grave attack on their physical integrity. Now, any of these rights, reproductive choices which a person exercises, there should be proper confidentiality that is to be maintained. Otherwise, it's a grave breach of right to privacy of an individual. And lack of privacy can also act as a coercion to give way to harmful practices such as unsafe abortion choices, because they fear that they will be socially stigmatized. And third-party authorizations, whether it is from the husband of the woman or from any other medical professionals, all of these third-party authorizations are also considered to be a violation of a privacy of a woman. Now, right to information and education deals with information that is accessible, information that is gender neutral, age appropriate, and information that should not perpetuate any stereotypical notions. It should be accessible and it should be understandable. Whereas when we talk about education, sex education in schools is very essential, and it is the need of the hour as of today. Right to the highest attainable standard of health. So not just, there are various other components of health such as safe and portable drinking water, sanitation, healthy and occupational environmental conditions. So health is multifaceted in nature, and reproductive health can only be exercised when all these different facets of health are ensured for an individual. Now, right to benefit from scientific progress. As we know, science has made great progress from science has made great progress, and all individuals should have the opportunity to access the benefit from this scientific progress. So if it is possible to save lives and create new lives, reduce maternal mortality rates, create access to different kinds of conception and contraception methods, all of that should be made available to individuals. All of this, they form the basis of reproductive rights when we talk on an international level. Here I have certain conclusion and suggestions that how states should work on achieving equality and non-discrimination with regard to sexual and reproductive health. They should take measure to provide full, scientifically correct and impartial information on contraceptive techniques to individuals, and healthcare should be accessible, available, of good quality and affordable in nature. Unsafe abortion practices and other health hazards should be avoided. Comprehensive sex education is required as of now, and acts of violence against women should be criminalized. Elimination of social and cultural exclusion of persons infected with HIV/AIDS should not be culturally excluded, and there should be increased public awareness in the country and on an international level regarding reproductive health of individuals. With this, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Moving on to the next presenter. Next, I invite Dr. Arlene Essif and Aishwarya MU, Assistant Professors, Mar Gregoris College of Law, Trivandrum, to present on the topic Legal Aspects of Abortion Laws in India. I welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you, Uttara. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
There is some net issues in my area. Can I switch off my video? Will that be okay?
It's okay, ma'am.
Thank you.
Please, no problem.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, respected chair and dear participants. My paper is on legal aspects of abortion laws in India. The supreme right available to every human undoubtedly is the right to life and personal liberty. Every woman who has been given such an absolute right can enjoy her personal liberty and alter her body in any way she can. She can decide about her sexual health and shape her reproductive choices. The Honorable Supreme Court in Sujita Srivastava and versus Chandigarh administration held that a woman's right to make reproductive choice is a dimension of her personal liberty and can be exercised to procreate as well as to abstain from procreating. The Bombay High Court, on its own motion in 2016, strongly affirmed women's right to abortion as an aspect of the fundamental right to live with dignity, recognizing that forcing a woman to continue a pregnancy represents a violation of the woman's bodily integrity and aggravates her mental trauma, which would be deleterious to her mental health. A 9-judge bench in Justice K.S. Puttaswamy and another versus Union of India unanimously recognized right to privacy as a fundamental right under the Constitution. The bench reiterated Sujitra Srivastava's case and affirmed that the woman's right to abortion is a facet of the right to privacy, and hence all her reproductive rights and choices should be ensured by the state. Prior to the enactment of Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, induced abortion was considered as a criminal offense under IPC, except in case to save the life of the mother. The stringent practice of imposing criminality hindered safe abortions and forced the woman to go for unsafe or illegal abortions, thereby affecting her right to health. It was in 1964 an attempt to liberalize the abortion law began in India due to high maternal mortality caused by unsafe abortion. The Shah Committee was appointed by government. It carried out a comprehensive review of the socio-cultural, legal and medical aspect of abortion and recommended legalizing abortion to protect women's health and life on both compassionate and medical grounds. Based on the recommendation, in 1971, MTP Act was passed legalizing abortion in India, thereby to circumvent the criminality clause around abortion. The Act as amended in 2021 highlights in what situation a pregnancy can be terminated, the stipulated time within which a pregnancy will be terminated, in what place this termination will take place, and who is authorized to conduct such a termination. The Act allows termination of pregnancy if continuance of the pregnancy would involve grave risk to the physical and mental health of the woman, or if pregnancy results from a sex crime such as rape or intercourse with a mentally challenged woman, or if there is a situation that if the child is born would suffer from serious deformities, or if the pregnancy results from failure of contraception method used by a woman and her partner, regardless of their marital status. That is, now even an unmarried woman can terminate her pregnancy subject to the conditions of the MTP Act. The law allows any government hospital to conduct the abortions, and for private hospitals, they need prior approval or certification. And the decision regarding termination will be made only by a specialized medical practitioner, and the Act confers full protection to such medical practitioner against any criminal proceedings, provided the abortion was done in good faith. The Act and the MTP rules 2021 raised the upper gestation limit for termination from 20 to 24 weeks for certain categories of women, which includes survivors of rape, differently abled women, minor, women whose marital status changed during an ongoing pregnancy, and in cases of women with pregnancy in disaster or emergency situations. The Act also allows abortion after 24 weeks, where the state level medical board diagnoses substantial fetal abnormalities. In all other cases, the upper gestation limit for termination will be 20 weeks. And the opinion of 2 registered medical practitioners is required for termination of pregnancy between 20 to 24 weeks. Before this period, only 1 registered medical practitioner's opinion is required. The Act allows pregnancy to be terminated only with the consent of the pregnant woman. That is, the woman will be having the right to decide about the abortion. Only in cases where abortion may affect her life, her freedom may be curtailed. However, a minor or a mentally ill woman requires the written permission of her guardian for termination. The Act also ensures the identity of women undergoing abortion to be kept confidential. Thus, it is commendable that the government has taken such a bold step to liberalize and legalize abortion. However, the amendment still leaves the women with various conditionalities, which in many cases becomes an impediment to access safe abortion. As there is advancement in science and medical technology, the extended 24 weeks gestation period for termination shall be applied or made available to all women and not for just special categories of women as cited in the Act. The Act further requires specialized medical practitioners for performing the termination, excluding trained medical staff. And in remote areas, there is shortage of such specialists in community health centers. Therefore, the pregnant woman in such areas may continue to find it difficult to access facilities for safe abortion. The prolonged search for such a specialist or a second doctor's opinion for second trimester abortion can exhaust the permitted time period for termination under the MTP Act. Again, the Act allows abortion after 24 weeks only when a medical board diagnoses fetal abnormalities. This means that for a case requiring abortion due to rape or changed psychosocial circumstances that exceed 24 weeks, their only recourse will be through a writ or to approach the court. The permission of the medical board, it creates an impediment for accessing the abortion, as many women, especially child rape victims, discover they are pregnant only at a very later stage. So to conclude, in the backdrop of the seemingly advanced law, the experience of women seeking abortion continues to be impacted by the fear of society, lack of familial support, and the judgmental attitude of the medical board. The amended law still does not give the woman the right to get a safe and medically approved abortion on demand. As long as there is fully informed consent, a woman's decision to terminate her pregnancy must be left up to her and her doctor, and not entirely with the medical board to determine that for her. So, the law must permit more reproductive decisional autonomy and self-determination without any discrimination or incrimination to women, so that unsafe abortion and its health hazards are combated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Moving to the next presenter. Next, we have Aruna BK, Guest Lecturer, Government Law College, Trivandrum, and Abhaya BK, Assistant Professor, Mount Gregorius College of Law, Trivandrum, on the topic Saying No to Unwanted Pregnancy, the Legal Skepticism. I welcome you both.
Thank you, Uttara. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. A good day to all. Today, I'm about to speak some thoughts on saying no to unwanted pregnancy, the legal skepticism. And I will be discussing the ethical, moral, and legal questions relating to termination of unwanted pregnancies. And a reflection of these questions in the Indian legal system will be discussed by my co-presenter. Now, to begin with, the right of a woman to make a decision in reproductive matters is controversial for some time, posing ethical, moral, and legal questions. Reproduction as a matter of choice may have two legal implications. First, vesting of absolute freedom on women to make a decision, and second, allowing her to terminate unwanted pregnancy only on limited circumstances. In India, the second view is adopted. The reason for this may be found in ethical and moral understandings of the society. The ethical issues involved in granting reproductive rights to women is strongly rooted in religious sentiments and often raises the question whether man has the right to destroy that which God created. Woman, as a creator of life, is worshipped in India, but her right to decide not to give birth to an unwanted child is not accepted. Also, the correctness of vesting the right to make decisions on reproductive matters on women and the arguability of corresponding rights of men is often debated. Though the questions whether women may be given the right to take a decision at all, and if yes, in what circumstances she may be given that right, and should that right extend to her deciding whether and when to have a child, etc., are legal, they are closely connected to moral and religious sentiments. In a traditionally religious society, vesting of absolute rights in reproductive matters may evoke strong opposition because it challenges the basic family values and imparts sexual freedom on women. As a consequence, some socially less accepted practices, such as premarital sex and extramarital sex, which are kept in control by the social stigma attached to illegitimacy of the children born out of such relations, is lessened. With legalizing of living together relationships, decriminalizing of consensual sex between adults, and granting of right to inheritance upon illegitimate children, the basic family values and the fine fabric of social morality is already feared tearing apart, and adding reproductive rights of women to the list may be perceived as something worsening the scenario. Also, giving women the freedom to make decisions to terminate an unwanted pregnancy is something which challenges the patriarchal values of the society. Two important questions should be answered if reproductive rights are to be vested on women. Firstly, which category of women should be given reproductive rights? All or only the married ones and the rape victims? And secondly, whether the rights should be absolute or restricted. Both these questions have relevance in determining the nature of law, if there be any law at all, for providing for termination of pregnancy. Addressing the first question, it can be said that women of all categories should be given the freedom to decide what should happen to her body. What should happen to one's body is a question of individual dignity and privacy, which are essential to every single person. And this does not cease just because a woman is unmarried. Discussing the importance of individual dignity, privacy, and liberty, the Supreme Court of India has rightly observed in Joseph Shine versus Union of India, affirming its earlier views in case Puttaswamy and another versus Union of India, that to live is to live with dignity. The court continued that privacy of an individual is an essential aspect of dignity, and the ability of an individual to protect a zone of privacy enables the realization of the full value of life and liberty. Privacy enables the individual to retain autonomy of body and mind. The privacy of the body entitles an individual to the integrity of physical aspects of personhood and to the freedom of self-determination. Understanding and respecting this constitutional guarantee of individual dignity and privacy, all women should be given the freedom to terminate unwanted pregnancies. Addressing the second question can be more difficult because for determination of the limits of right to terminate unwanted pregnancies, it calls for determination of limits of determining where we have to limit the right. If absolute rights are conferred, it would mean that women are given complete right to decide whether to get impregnated or not, and if yes, by whom, and also whether to continue the pregnancy or not. This question points to another important and one of the most valuable rights of human beings, the right to be born. Conferring absolute rights upon women to terminate pregnancy may lead to immature and unreasonable decisions, and this may affect the right to be born of the fetus. Here, whether the fetus has an absolute right to be born also becomes relevant. Therefore, most of the legal systems are very much skeptical about granting absolute rights to women to terminate pregnancy. With these words, I invite my co-presenter to discuss how these questions are addressed in Indian legal system. Thank you.
Good day to all. An analysis of the Indian legal system shows that there are actually no specific legislations guaranteeing women the right to terminate pregnancy, though women are given some autonomy in deciding to continue with the pregnancy. For example, the Indian Penal Code punishes miscarriages done without the consent of the woman. Sections 313 and 314 of the Indian Penal Code speaks about the consent of women for termination of pregnancy. The Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act imposes restrictions on medical termination to the risk. The termination is permissible if continuation of pregnancy causes a risk to the child to be born or to the mental or physical health of the mother. Though consent of the husband is not required under the Act or the rules framed thereunder, there is not much choice to women in terminating her pregnancy, except on the grounds mentioned. However, Explanation 1 to Section 3 of the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, as amended in 2021, recognizes the anguish caused by the pregnancy as a result of failure of any device or method used by any woman or her partner for the purpose of limiting the number of children or preventing such pregnancy as constituting grave injury to the mental health of such pregnant woman and permits termination on that ground. This is a welcome move, firstly, because the provision is applicable to any woman or her partner instead of a married woman or her husband, indicating a broad approach towards recognizing reproductive rights of all women, irrespective of her marital status. And secondly, it recognizes the right of a woman to make a decision whether to have a child or not by using some birth control measures. In cases of pregnancy caused by rape, the anguish caused by such pregnancy is presumed to constitute injury to the mental health of the pregnant woman, and therefore it is a circumstance allowing medical termination of pregnancy. In cases of pregnancy of a minor, the Act only says that medical termination cannot be conducted without the consent of parent or guardian. In both these cases, what the law provides is a curative measure and our legal system fails to recognize the right of a woman to say no to an unwanted pregnancy by positively conferring that right on her. However, Section 5 of the POCSO Act recognizes the offense of aggravated penetrative sexual assault for making a child pregnant as a consequence of sexual assault. Thus, none of the foregoing provisions confer on women a right to terminate right to determine whether to continue unwanted pregnancy or not, but just declare the grounds and conditions on which pregnancy may be medically terminated. Another major problem in Indian laws is that it recognizes only the offense of rape and not marital rape or impregnation without consent. In cases of matrimonial relations, it is legally and morally presumed that the woman is under an obligation to consent to childbearing and delivery of the child, even if she is not prepared for that. Unilateral decision by a woman not to have a child may amount to cruelty to her husband in the light of decided cases. This would mean that in the case of marital rape, where the woman cannot claim failure of contraceptive measures, nor could she claim the grounds allowed for rape victims, she is left without remedies. It cannot legally presume that the woman consenting to sexual intercourse is at the same time consenting to get impregnated, and it is only logical and reasonable to think that she may consent to intercourse without any intentions of begetting a child. Therefore, it is suggested that law should confer on every woman above the age of 18 years the right to make choices in reproductive matters. As a new offense of impregnating a woman without her consent should be adopted into Indian legal system. And in cases of unwanted pregnancy, the woman should not be made responsible for looking after the child. Instead, the legal responsibility should be fixed on men to take care of the child born out of unwanted pregnancy. Since there is a compulsion on a wife to deliver a child and her unilateral decision not to have a child is considered as a cruelty to her husband, it is suggested that the husband should be made responsible to compensate her for any loss of job occurred as a result of pregnancy or delivery of child in case she decides to separate from the husband. With these concluding remarks, we open up the paper for further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I now welcome Narayana Sharma and Swati Nair A, LLM students in Mar Gregorius College of Law, Trivandrum, to present on the topic Sex Workers and Reproductive Rights. I welcome both of you.
Thank you. Let me take a second to share my presentation. So good afternoon, sir, and good afternoon to one and all present here. Vectors of diseases. Unfortunately, this is the term used to define sex workers, a severely stigmatized population and one of the most ignored section of our society. So, to have a look at the moral and legal conundrum that exists when it comes to reproductive rights of sex workers, I'm Swati, LLM student of MGCL, is presenting the paper titled Reproductive Rights of Sex Workers, a Moral and Legal Conundrum. Sex workers are extremely vulnerable to adverse health conditions related to having frequent sexual intercourse, such as unwanted pregnancies, cervical cancer, or sexual violence. In this paper, I'll be discussing some aspects of the reproductive rights of sex workers and whether these fundamental rights of sex workers are recognized in our society. According to the National AIDS Control Organization, there are over 7.76 lakh of sex workers in India. The unofficial figures place these numbers far higher. People are forced to do sex work either for better income and livelihood opportunities or as a result of sex trafficking. Reproductive rights are essential to the realization of all human rights. They encompass a spectrum of civil, political, economic, and social rights, from the rights to health and life to the rights of equality and non-discrimination, privacy, information, and to be free from torture or ill treatment. The highest attainable standard of sexual and reproductive health is a fundamental human right affirmed through numerous international and national laws, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Conference on Population and Development, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The legal statute governing the rights of sex workers and trafficked persons in India is the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act of 1986. According to this, while prostitution per se is legal, a multitude of activities surrounding it, like public solicitation, brothels, minor sexual commerce, trafficking, pimping, are illegal. This has led to a multitude of implicating structural barriers that hamper their fundamental sexual reproductive health rights. Although sex work is not crime in India, many sex workers face threats because of associated activities that are criminalized under law. Additionally, stigma makes sex workers vulnerable to violence and discrimination. Widespread criminalization of sex workers is often based on portrayals of sex workers as either dangerous, immoral individuals, and often as victims of human trafficking. Violence against female sex workers have received inadequate attention from researchers and practitioners alike. Female sex workers have a higher unmet need of contraceptives compared to women in general population, which is evident from the high rate of unintended pregnancies, high abortion rates, and a great desire to prevent future pregnancies. Fearing legal repercussions such as arrest, detention, and loss of child custody, sex workers were found to avoid seeking vital SRH care at critical moments across their life course. The SRH needs of sex workers who are pregnant, parenting, or who wish to become pregnant also remain unmet, including access to essential services such as parental, delivery, and postnatal care. The SRH needs of pregnant and parenting sex workers remain inadequately addressed in both health system and research, partly owing to the public perceptions of sex workers as unlikely or unfit parents. But sex workers and parenthood are intimately entwined. Many sex workers have children, and many support dependent children. Often these women are unable to negotiate with clients who refuse to use condom in exchange for more money. In addition, traffickers and pimps do not allow usage of contraceptives, especially in cases where women are held captive. Condom failure or condom breakage and non-use among female sex workers are common because of physical or sexual violence and drug or alcohol intoxication during sex work. Further, sex workers' financial and emotional dependence to their partners undermine their autonomy to insist on use of condom or make them forego condom use for extra payment, leading to unintended pregnancies. Unintended pregnancies that result in live birth have socioeconomic implications that may intensify HIV risk associated with sex work. Globally, sex workers experience high rates of unintended pregnancies. Significant challenges to accessing effective contraception include the availability and cost of services, plus the distances involved in accessing them. Many sex workers also lack access to safe and affordable abortion procedures. Abortions are a common sought solution among these female sex workers to reduce the socioeconomic repercussions of unintended pregnancies. Medical Termination of Pregnancy Amendment Act of 2021, the latest Amendment Act. One of the salient features of this act is that a pregnancy occurring due to failure of any device used by any woman or her partner. Earlier, it was woman or husband, with the purpose of limiting number of children may be presumed to constitute a grave injury to the mental health of women. This is a major progressive change in the Act, which earlier accounted for failure of contraception by the woman or her husband. This amendment now recognizes and covers couples in live-in relationships, sex workers, and pregnancies arising from adultery. Even still, abortion rights of sex workers remain the same. The widespread stigma and discrimination is the reason for this also. So concluding my presentation by saying that we must ensure that every woman receives SRH services as she needs without being shamed or judged. No country will be fully developed unless all its women are safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Moving on to our next presenter, I now invite Nida Mushtaq Ali, student, Mar Gregorius College of Law, Trivandrum, to present on the topic Feminist Jurisprudence on Reproductive Rights of Women. I welcome you.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's visible.
Is it audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to present a presentation on the topic Feminist Jurisprudence on Reproductive Rights of Women. And these are my contents. Today I'll be presenting on these topics, the feminist jurisprudence by Anne Scales and various feminist theories and the fetal personhood laws, the artificial reproductive technology, and Anne Scales' concern for reproductive justice and the various solutions for these matters. To begin with, what is feminist jurisprudence? Feminist jurisprudence is a philosophy of law based on the political, economic, and social equality of sexes. It seeks to explain ways in which law played a role in women's former subordinate status. Anne Scales, who is the founder of the legal field of feminist jurisprudence, and she has coined the term feminist jurisprudence for the first time in 1977. She became a leading feminist voice and influenced on a number of topics, including reproductive justice, by emphasizing the need for abortions. The term reproductive justice includes legal, social, cultural, and economic concerns raised by women's ability to give life. The term reproductive choice emphasizes that women should not be forced into stereotyped roles and they should not be treated unequally because they bear children. Now on to the various feminist theories. These theories will be dealt here: the formal equality theory, liberal feminist theory, the relational feminism, and the dominance theory. Before I start, let me ask you what we as feminists can do to restore reproductive justice for females. However, when we define feminism, I simply do not believe that anyone can deny the disadvantages females encounter by virtue of their capacity to give life are feminist issues. Men created the religious beliefs and secular laws about sexuality, women, and human reproduction throughout our history. While we cannot ignore the roles of men in ensuring reproductive justice and freedom, we must focus on the unique experiences of females and the effects that regulating or prohibiting abortion and contraception have on women, their lives, and their relationships to others. The various feminist theories. The formal equality theory. It is a theory by which the society should treat individuals according to their characteristics, regardless of gender, and societal assumptions based on stereotypes. That means this theory only states that equal status for all members regardless of their gender. Now on to the liberal feminist theory. Liberal feminist theory states that it deals with the integration of women more truly into the power structure and give women equal status to positions that men had traditionally dominated. Now let us look on to the relational feminism or the relational feminist theory. It believes that women and men approach the world differently, which may result in a greater allocation of reproductive rights to the women based on her unique experiences. Now on to the dominance theory. Finally, the dominance theory posits that men and women are different because of the historic societal fact that men hold a dominant position while women occupy a subordinate one. Because of the often private nature of this dominance, proponents of this theory have argued for legal regulations of areas where the law traditionally has been absent. Now on to the fatal personhood laws. The profiltration of fatal personhood laws. The fatal personhood refers to certain areas of the law that consider the fetus as a separate unborn person rather than a part of the women carrying fetus. Statutes and common law precedent recognizing the fetus as a person while the embryo is in uterus have eroded this live birth requirement. To be more specific, state and federal legislatures have enacted civil wrongful death statutes, and courts have permitted lawsuits against a woman by her child for anything that happens to the uterus while he or she is in the womb of the woman. Few statutes have gone so far, but almost all have begun to incorporate the idea of a fetus as a person in areas of the law outside of the constitutional context. Now, feminist theories must take notice of this trend, as there is no way to equalize the rights of fetus and the women without undermining the liberty of women or granted to women. The movement to recognize a fetus as a person inherently conflicts with the women's right to bodily integrity and procreational liberty. Now on to the artificial reproductive technology, or IVF, in vitro filtration. Delays bodily integrity and personal liberty of women. There's a famous case, Davis versus Davis, in 1992. This case states that because a frozen embryo exists outside anybody's body does not implicate that the traditional bodily integrity protections, and so it serves to increase the reproductive rights of men. IVF delays the bodily integrity veto power of an indeterminate period of time of the mother or the women. On to the various solutions I have put forward to all these problems. Fatal personhood laws and court decisions involving IVF increasingly equalize the rights of all parties in reproductive process. Instead of producing a greater sense of equality in reproductive choices for men and women, this approach to reproductive rights has served to curtail the rights of women in decisions involving procreation by diminishing the strength of constitutional protections of bodily integrity and privacy. The right to physical integrity is supreme, as it ensures the basic privacy freedom of women, which is still a constitutional right. Feminists should choose a theory to support carefully and use its structure to argue strengtheningly against fetal personhood laws that erode the bodily integrity of women and to seek reinforce a historical system of inequality. Furthermore, the law must allocate rights regarding IVF treatment in a way that will not disadvantage women on the basis of infertility. IVF is a new era of the law, but it implicates rights of the very core of women's reproductive freedom. Now, to conclude, I'm sure there are many others to work towards reproductive justice, and I hope that we will find them. Thank you.
Nita, can you please stop sharing your screen? Thank you so much. So moving on to the next presenter, I now invite Avinash Singh, Assistant Professor, SOA National Institute of Law, Bhubaneswar, to present on the topic Analyzing a Reproductive Right based approach in determining reproductive choice of women. I welcome you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I hope I'm audible. First of all, evening to all of you who are present here. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are.
Okay, fine. This paper is about defining a sexuality and the reproductive perspective to the decision making of a woman, and that's the topic goes with. So, sexual and reproductive rights are the areas of research wherein the individuality of women is challenged, and hence there is a need for a comprehensive research for these issues. And since these issues are very much related to the social legal importance, it becomes also significant to have these issues in the mainstream research. So, as a law, from the legal perspective, what I could find was not much, but I mean, my study went to more over the sociological contextualization of the reproductive health. And first of all, in the paper, I have tried to differentiate between the health and the sexuality. So when we talk about reproductive health, health and the rights. So reproductive health and reproductive right are two different things. When we talk about reproductive health, I have seen more people talking about the right-based, the sociological contextualization of right of a woman. Whereas when we talk about reproductive right, we talk about the legal perspective of the reproductive right of women. So there are two differences, two mainstream differences that I could have found. And contextualizing these issues are why they are very essential for policy and lawmaking, and it actually improves the health of women, which is almost half of the Earth's population. So therefore, this issue is very, very important. And then, since we have seen that many of the reproductive choices, they are caused in the areas in the developing countries like Africa and Uganda and other countries, even in the South American countries, the choices are very much forced on the women. In many states, we have seen that the knowledge about the reproductive health is very, very low. In many states, we have seen that due to religious, political, or social disorders, the reproductive health of a woman was also affected. So all these areas have been discussed in a different context, aligned to what element I'm talking about. If I'm talking about the religious contextualization, we have seen that in some places the priest or the head of that particular religion, they have tried to subvert these rights to a greater extent. They have tried to make them in the line of their religion, which was not which was not the needed contemporary approach, but they have done that, which has degraded the right or reproductive choices of women. Now, in the second part of the paper, now on the third part of the paper, we have approached from the human rights perspective that the sexual and reproductive right of a woman has a very significance to the fundamental debate on the reproductive choice. So the more rights you will give, the more sexual and reproductive right you give to a woman, it helps them to create more reproductive choices. So it's about freedom to not just choose sexuality, but it's freedom to choose the methods of procreation. It's freedom to choose the partners and lot other things. So reproductive right has a list of things which is being considered as part of a woman's freedom. Now, then the existence of cross-cultural and transnational experiences that I was talking about, that in many areas there is a good push given to the reproductive health in many countries where the situation is totally otherwise. So these things became very, very important when we talk about the reproductive rights of women. The areas that we are covering is South American, African, and Asian regions that are majorly dominating the literature of my paper. And therefore, I think so that the multiple issues that I have covered in my paper that hover around the reproductive choices have been technically talked about in the sense of social, economic, legal, political, and feministic approach. So all these approaches have been utilized to make this particular paper. And also the key there's a limitation to the paper, that it's not even I will say sociological paper. It's that some of the legal dimension of the paper is there. So there is need to develop the policy approach or the sociologically driven policy approach to this particular topic of reproductive health or reproductive rights. So that's all my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I now request all the participants to kindly fill up the feedback form that has been posted in the chat, and to the presenters that you have to present your final report before 22nd November 2021. Now that we have officially completed all our presentators, I now request our session chair speaker for his comments. I welcome you, sir.
Thanks, Atura. So I first of all appreciate the effort taken by all the speakers in the session. So excellent presentation from the speakers. So I'll actually just try to quickly point out the main aspects which has been highlighted by the speakers in their presentations. So I think then we can actually come to a common thread of what was the main outcome from our session as such. So if you look at our session, the main theme obviously was to look at more from a legal perspective of how the reproductive rights and issues from the legal perspective has been highlighted in the Indian context as such. And few speakers obviously try to look at the international perspective as also. So I think starting with Professor Vinny Kevalia, we had actually looked at the feminist jurisprudence aspect, and then need to emphasize upon the woman's dignity was clearly pointed out by the speaker in this context, and obviously the aspect of informed choice and consent was clearly highlighted by the speaker, Professor Vinny, in this context. Then obviously we had doctoral scholars, Susmita Das and Shubhang, sorry, in case I missed the spelling, Komasta, right? If I'm correct, actually. Sorry, in case there is any mistake on the spelling part, right? Okay. So there is clear understanding of the medical termination of pregnancy legislation was looked into. Historical aspects on that context also been touched upon, and it was basically trying to look at how the need for surrogacy should be provided as an important right from a woman's right as well as reproductive right perspective as such, and how it should be legislatively accepted in India was highlighted. So that was the second presentation which we had actually in the session. And then obviously we had Bhageshri, Advocate Bhageshri, actually helping us to look at the international definition of reproductive right, and also looking at the reproductive autonomy concept to be highlighted, especially from international perspective. Then obviously Professor Aishwarya and Dr. Arlene helped us to look at the legal framework and abortion as an option, how the legal framework in India has evolved in that context, and how there is a socio-cultural issue around that issue that comes into picture. Also the latest scenario of how the unsafe abortion and health hazards should be tackled was clearly looked at. So then we obviously had Professor Aruna BK and Abhaya. There was clear understanding of women rights and reproductive decision issues were highlighted. And interestingly, this paper actually looked at two important aspects. One is the ethical aspect. Ethical issues was looked at by one of the speakers, and other speaker actually obviously looked at the legislative aspects, including IPC, POSCO, and other important significant legislative aspects in that direction. Then Narayana Sharma and Swati Nair, LLM students from the institute, actually obviously looked at the sex workers' vulnerability and their issues, especially in the context of reproductive rights, also has been looked into, and that was more of a contemporary issue that's been tried to be looked at by the speakers in that context. Then obviously we had Nidham, who actually looked at, interestingly, taking us back to the feminist jurisprudence issues, how the feminist jurisprudence, various issues, various sub-schools under the feminist jurisprudence could be looked into, was what Nidha had actually helped us to highlight. And finally, we had Dr. Avinash Singh trying to look at the reproductive right in a wider ambit, in a broader context. Dr. Avinash helped us to actually look at the concept of reproductive right, especially also highlighted the fact that various approaches, including sociological approach, can be taken to this particular theme as such. So that's what actually we had in our session till now, to quickly to point out from the speakers contribution, and that actually helps us to say that the common thread which ran through almost all the presentations could be actually to look at how proactive right-based approach in the legal framework is needed to actually to ensure that women's dignity, and how it is linked with the health as well as reproductive right need to actually be well established and well protected under the legal framework. And right-based approach, how far the right-based approach can be embedded in the law, could be the main takeaway from the presentations that's coming up. And also there is this interesting aspect of how more sensitive approach could be adopted by the judicial institutions as well as other policy making institutions, could be something which we can actually highlight, which was obviously seen in many of the presentations from the speakers. And that's something which I feel that it's important to look at when you see this question of reproductive right. One obviously is a proactive legislative framework which actually talks about right-based approach that is needed. Second comes the aspect of how far the sensitive approach need to be taken by the institutions, policy making institutions, policy enforcing institutions, as well as judicial institutions, and also national human rights institutions need to also take into account this particular point. And various ethical as well as theoretical perspectives were highlighted in the papers that's being presented. Obviously, the feminist jurisprudence and how feminist jurisprudence need to be looked at by the legal scholars was clearly highlighted. So this entire series of presentations by the speakers throws open the need for more research on the topics also. I would actually just highlight certain points which would be important for a group of scholars to look at in the way forward when you look at reproductive rights as such. So certain of the important areas which can be explored is that how the sociological approach to law, or sociology of law approach, or law and society approach can be brought into picture. In that context, I think there is significant theoretical perspectives like motherhood wage penalty concept, which talks about how when you look at motherhood, they actually earn less wages as opposed to other women who are not a mother, and that kind of discrimination or that kind of disparity. It's actually been studied in the sociological context, and very interesting literature has come in the sociology perspective. That can be adopted, and that can be seen how far law as a framework has adopted that kind of issues is one way of trying to take forward the theoretical as well as legal discussions which we had today. We can actually look at sociology of law or law and society approaches, and one of the theoretical aspects I just mentioned, like a motherhood wage penalty concept, could be one interesting area of study which would be very important in the Indian context also. Now, other important aspects which is significantly to be looked into is that when you talk about this feminist jurisprudence, it is important to look at how critical legal studies has evolved, and feminist jurisprudence obviously as a part of critical legal studies have evolved in the context of international law also. That is something which could also be looked at, and how women rights as well as reproductive rights in that context has been neglected or is been not considered to be a mainstream right. All these aspects can be looked into, especially from a critical legal studies perspective as such. So these are certain points which I just highlighted, which could be way forward and could be explorative topics which would be helpful for future researchers based on our discussion today in the session. So not to actually take more time, but I'll touch upon one more important topic in this regard with Rakode's permission, in case I have time on that. Do we have time?
Yes,
Yes.
Right. Yes. So I think one more important aspect I feel as to be very significant to be looked into while I was looking at the various topics in our session as well as other session also. I think a topic which is usually neglected is the concept of how pregnancy and maternity related discrimination at workplace happens. At a workplace, there is also an additional element of responsibility that need to be taken by the corporate organizations as well as the employers in that particular context. So that is an important aspect. Many times we actually neglect in the entire context of pregnancy and maternity related discrimination aspect. One aspect which we usually say is that there is a maternity benefit legislative framework which has been adopted by India as well as most of the advanced countries have adopted a maternity benefit legislation. But maternity benefit legislation need not be just providing a particular period of time of paid leave. That is not the only requirement which comes under the aspect of pregnancy and maternity related issues. But the discrimination relating to pregnancy and maternity aspects is much more wider and much more what you could call as systemic in the context where we have to actually look at a much more pragmatic approach in the dealing with such issues as such. So a law in practice approach through looking at new frameworks that is evolving would be required to look at workplace discrimination of women, especially relating to pregnancy and maternity related discrimination aspect. One approach I would like to highlight in that context is the business and human rights remedy framework or business and human rights framework that is being evolved in the getting involved in the human rights context. So business and human rights perspective actually talks about three aspects. It talks about the state's responsibility to make laws and adopt that aspect. Also, it talks about the responsibility of employers or corporate organizations to ensure that there is adequate respect towards that particular legislative and policy aspects in the organization context is being coming into picture. And third is the aspect of what are the remedy frameworks that can be provided as such. So when you look at business and human rights approach, and if you look at the international perspective, there is already guiding principle for business and human rights that's being developed at the international level. Even though soft law framework, it actually have clear implications for nations to actually adopt the business and human rights guideline principles. And if you look at from a women rights perspective, one of the important areas where corporate organizations can be or should be held responsible is to ensure that there is no pregnancy and maternity related discrimination at workplace that actually should come into picture. And business and human rights frameworks could be actually used to pragmatically use this kind of tackle the situation of what you could call as workplace discrimination against women in the context of maternity and pregnancy aspects as such. And in that scenario, there is enough room for national human rights institutional frameworks as well as India's national policy in the context of in the context of guiding principles of business and human rights to adopt clear disclosure requirements from corporate organizations. So that is one important aspect that that could be looked at. And here it is important to look at issues that may come into picture in various of the unorganized as well as fringe areas of economy, like plantation workers, rural workforce, and rural employment aspects. All these aspects has to also be tackled clearly when you talk about business and human rights frameworks, and how this issue can be business and human rights framework can be used to look at more accountability upon corporate organizations also in the context of women rights, especially relating to pregnancy and maternity aspects, can be addressed as such. So with this note on how we can actually take forward this research, which we actually discussed till now, on how there is issues which can come up from ethical, legal, as well as various theoretical perspectives relating to maternity rights and reproductive rights for women. How to take it forward, how to actually explore it. I just try to summarize and try to give you certain pointers to explore the area in the future context. I hope all the speakers would actually take enough efforts to actually go and research more and publish their papers. And also in this context, I actually once again appreciate the effort taken by the speakers to help and develop an interesting deliberation on the topics which of significant importance in the global and Indian context as of now. And with that, I also thank the organizers, Margaret College of Law and the Center for Women and Law for inviting me to chair the session. So on that end, I end my brief points regarding the session. So thank you. Thanks for the patient hearing to all of you. I'll hand it over to the student coordinator and rapporteur. I also appreciate the effort and support from rapporteur and student coordinator, right? Uttara, student coordinator, as well as rapporteur, Professor Aishwarya. Thanks for the help. Over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for that highly enlightening words. And now that we have come to an end of our today's session, I thank each and everyone here, our honorable session chair speaker, Dev Prasad sir, our rapporteur Aishwarya ma'am, and all the participants. I'm thanking all on behalf of myself and on behalf of Mar Gregorius College of Law for taking all the efforts and taking such innovative topics, such innovative, thoughtful, enlightening topic for today's presentation. I conclude thanking you all for your time and patience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deva.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.